Good afternoon. Welcome everyone, and thank you for the audience. This side event, it's about the Brazilian emissions, how low can you go? And we are going to present about the Brazilian emissions, the actual data, and how much can Brazil increase ambition. I would like to present the speakers. The first speaker will be Tasso Azevedo from Climate Observatório and MapBiomas. The second is Fernando Guedes Pinto from SOS Atlântica Foundation. And the third one is Izabella Teixeira from UN International Research Panel and the former Minister of Environment in Brazil. Thank you, everyone. And Tasso, the floor is yours.
So what I will present is the emissions of Brazil in the most recent data that we launched last week. And then talk a little bit about how we are against our targets and if it's possible actually to have Brazil going close to zero in emissions, as is our ambition long term. This work is done within a coalition in Brazil called the Climate Observatório, which joins 72 organizations working on climate change. And 5 of those organizations working on preparing the estimation of greenhouse gas emissions in Brazil now for almost 10 years. That's the team. And this work we do with emissions, it includes the emissions from 1990 all the way to 2020. It covers also all the states in Brazil, so the emissions at national level, but also for all the states. It includes all the greenhouse gas that is covered by the IPCC guidelines. We are looking into 600 sources of emissions for all this period. And we calculate also gross and net emissions. All of that is available in reports, also in infographics, and also in a web portal where you can see all the information that will be presented here, and also in more details if you want and are interested. Also, we start this year to do something linked with the municipalities. So now you have available in Brazil the greenhouse gas emissions from 2000 to 2018, year by year, for every single of the 5,500 municipalities in the country. And this goes together with a kind of a booklet where we suggest 7 actions that can be done at municipal level to address the emissions at this level. Okay, so let's talk about the emissions in Brazil. So last year, the gross emissions in Brazil was about 2.1 gigatons CO2 equivalent. All the data that I will show here, unless I say differently, it will be on GWP as with the 5th assessment report of IPCC emission factors. So you see that most of our emissions come from land use and land use change. This is 46%, and then the second largest source of emission is agriculture, mainly due to livestock. And then we have energy, and the remaining is on industrial processes and waste management. So this makes Brazil the 5th largest emitter of greenhouse gases, just after China, US, India, and Russia. If you consider European Union as one group, then it will be the 6th largest, but it's the 5th one. That's comparing the emissions in 2019 and 2020. This is very significant because while the world was reducing emission on between 6 and 7% last year due to COVID, in Brazil it's actually increased 9.5%. So we are going in a different direction than the world at this moment. And if you look more deeply into the different sectors, we will see that in energy, we actually decrease emissions by 4.5%, which makes sense if you compare with what's happening in the other countries. But in all the other sectors, we increase or get the emissions stable. And the most important growth was in land use change, where the growth was 23%, mainly due to the increase of deforestation in the Amazon and Cerrado. Here in this table, you also have the information on removals. So I was talking until now about like gross emissions, and then if you include also the removals, we are talking about a net emission of 1.5 gigatons, which will be an increase of 14% against the previous year. Also, the other important thing is, like, if you look at the story of the emissions in Brazil, you will see that we have a trend that was upwards in between 1990 and 2004, 2005, and then we have, which was the peak of emissions, and then we had a steep decline until 2010, 11, 12, 9, 10, 11, which was the lowest level, and then it was just growing. Since then, it's kind of the trend is going up, and the levels of 2020 is the same one, the same place we were 2006. So it's the highest level since then. This is just to be able to compare with other countries using the per capita emissions. Brazil is, if you have gross emissions, we are in 10 tons per person. If you take like net emissions, we are talking about 7. So we are more or less the same level in net emissions that we have for the planet. The world is 7.2. The per capita emissions. And just for comparison, China, US, and India, you see that where we are comparing to the other big emitters. The other interesting figure is what is the economic drive for those emissions. So different from most of the other countries that have like very significant large emissions, Brazil has 73.9% of the emissions in 2020 attached to the agribusiness sector, which means like the land use sector and the industry that is attached to that. So it's a very, very significant part of our emissions are attached to that. And the second one would be transportation with 8.6%. And if you look at this over the time, so you go from the bottom is 1919, going up to 2020, upwards, you see like the green part of this graphic is the amount of the emissions that is linked to the land use sector, agribusiness sector, and you see that this variation goes as it moves deforestation up and down. You will see this variation, but always a big portion was there. It's interesting to see also that Brazil, if you look at Brazil and the states, there is various situations in the emissions in Brazil. So you have the states of Pará, Mato Grosso, and Minas Gerais and São Paulo, which will be the largest ones in terms of emissions, mainly in the case of Pará and Mato Grosso because of the deforestation. Once you take out deforestation, which is most of the land use change, then you get to a different situation, and you have São Paulo as the biggest emitter, where you have most of the industries, most of consumption of energy, and so on. But there is also something interesting that if you take the net emissions in Brazil by state, there are 3 states that actually are in 2050, let's say, where we want to be in 2050. Those 3 states have negative emissions, if we say like, or net removal emissions in 2020, which was Amazonas, Amapá, and Roraima. And that's mainly because of the amount of protected areas that those states have. Another interesting figure about the states, if you look in Brazil, is that if you look at the states and the per capita emission of the states, it varies from 2 to 68. So there are states in Brazil which will be like the lowest levels, like the countries that have the lowest levels in per capita emission, and you have states that will have, per capita emissions that will be equal to the countries that have highest emissions, like, for example, Dubai and places like this, like Middle East. So yeah, very different circumstances happening in the country. Now let me talk about like the targets of Brazil. How am I in time?
You have
5 minutes?
yes.
Okay. So we have in Brazil we have like two main targets in terms of reduction emissions. One comes from the national policy on climate change, which was set at the same time that we set our commitments in COP15 in Copenhagen, in which the idea was to have a reduction of 36 to 38.9%, comparing to a projection of our emissions on the business as usual scenario in 2020. So this was set in 2010, looking to a projection for 2020. And if you make the calculations with all the regulations, it will mean that we will have to have an emission in 2020 between, the limit will be between 1.9 gigatons and 2.1 gigatons. Just one attention here, in this case, this was calculated using the GWP as the second assessment report of IPCC. So there is a small difference on the total if you compare like using the different conversion factors that you have on the different assessment reports. But just remember that. And then we have a second, obviously the second commitment, which is the Paris Accord, and we have our NDC, which we just have changed last 2 days. But it was originally reduced 37 to 43% the emissions in 2005 and 2030, comparing to 2025 and 2030, comparing to 2005 levels, which even with the change that we have today, it will the meaning is you will have to have a limit of emissions in 2025 of 1.3 gigatons in 2025 and 1.2 in 2030. So let's see how it goes in both of them. So now 2020 passed, so we can compare and see how we went. And if you look at the emissions, this dot line is the projection that was made in 2011 for to know where would be the point where we have to make the deviation for the curve. So let's see, was a business as usual unusual, right? Because it's too steep on growth. But that was what we have as a projection. And so the emission level that we have in 2020 was inside the buffer that we had as a target. So if you take the aggregate level, we achieved the target that was set in the 2010 policy on climate change. If you look at the specifics, then it's a different story. I will not have time to get into that. We just prepared a report on this that goes into each one of the promises that we have inside of this target. For example, we had a promise to decrease 80% of deforestation in the Amazon. We didn't achieve that, but it's another story that we can talk afterwards. So let's go to Paris Agreement, and that's my last minute. So for the Paris Agreement, the point that we have to, the first thing to show is that since we committed with the Paris Agreement in 2015, the emissions in Brazil has grown, not going down. So we are 4.5% higher in emissions than we were when we set the targets, or we proposed the targets, the INDCs in 2015. And but even though, if you look at where we want to be in 2025 and 2030, according to the NDCs, it's not very far, honestly. And why is that? Because if you look at 2030, where we want to be, which is 1.2 gigatons of emissions, net emissions, actually we were there before. Like in 2009, 10, 11, our emissions were below that. So actually the effort that we are talking about is actually coming back to where we were before. So while I was walking here, I was thinking about an idea to represent this in an easiest way to think about how can we be more ambitious. So if you look at the emissions, that's in the left side is all the emissions with all the sectors. If I take it out, the greenhouse, the emissions from the land use sector, which is the green part, you see that our trend on the emissions now, since 2015, is actually going down. So we were going good, actually, if you take it out, what's happening with deforestation. So This is what happens in the land use sector. We have an emission of 980 million tons in almost 1 gigaton in 2020, but we have a removal of 600, I don't see the number here, but 600 something. And then the net emission was 362 million tons, right? Now, think about this. In summary of that, the green part there is what we have as emission from the land use sector, and all the other sectors is on the blue side. And the light green is how much we have in removals. So that makes, in 2020, 1.5 gigatons of emissions. Now, if you just do that, don't move anything on the other sectors. The only thing you do is just take out deforestation, which is actually the commitment that we had yesterday, right? We have the forest yield. If you said that the forest yield and you were serious about that, there's no deforestation anymore in 2030. That means that our emissions, actually our net emissions, would be, just don't change anything else. We're not even increasing the removals, and our emission will be 0.5 gigatons, which means that our target could be easily today, if we are serious about what we said in the last 2 days, our target should be 65% reduction against 2020, or 78% reduction in 2005 levels. And that's not adding any commitment to what we have already committed this week. Thank you.
Very good, Tasso. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now it's the time for Luis Fernando Guedes Pinto. He's going to bring the opportunities of restoration, agriculture, and also reduce emissions from deforestation, but focus on the biome of Mata Atlântica, Atlantic forest in Brazil. So we will get a zoom in this very rich and important biome we have. And the floor is yours. Luis, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Marina. Could you just bring the presentation? So thank you for the introduction, Marina. I'm sorry. Let me, glasses and masks. It's a bunch of things. It's trouble. So we are launching today this report. It's a collaboration among SOS Mata Atlântica, Imaflora. Marina is the executive director, SEG. Tasso leads the group. And we are launching today. And Tasso and Marina are also co-authors of this report together with Renata Potenza. And we were challenged to think originally in a novel way as a biome as a jurisdiction. What if a biome were a jurisdiction? And how can we consider to build an NDC for this jurisdiction in Brazil? And how could it contribute to Brazil as a whole? So this is the purpose, the ambition of this work, looking at the Atlantic forest. There is a very particular biome of Brazil. So the context of the Atlantic forest. This is a part of the map of Brazil. And the yellow, you can see the original cover of native vegetation of the Atlantic forest. And in green, you can see the remaining native vegetation of the Atlantic forest. So the Atlantic forest is a top 2 global biodiversity hotspot in the world. It's the most anthropized Brazilian biome since the arrival of Europeans in the 16th century. It's a very highly fragmented and threatened biome, and all its ecosystems that are associated. And if we see the remaining forest cover, considering primary fragments over 3 hectares, there is only 12% left. If we consider primary and secondary fragments over half hectares, we have 29% of forest cover left. And keep in mind that 80% of this native vegetation is located in private lands. This is very important for any conservation strategy in the Atlantic forest. Well, besides that, this biome hosts and provides ecosystem services to 70% of Brazilian population. The main cities are located in the Atlantic forest, and also 80% of national GDP. This is the context. I'm not going through that because Tasso already talked about SEG. SEG is a collective initiative. It follows a robust methodology considering the national inventory, the IPCC. The method was published in Nature. But what we did, for this biome, we used data organized by SEG from 2000 to 2018. So we are looking to the past to understand the history and the profile of emissions of the Atlantic forest. And based on that, using SEG methodology and parameters, we estimated and projected emissions from 2005 to 2050. There are the deadlines and the timelines of the Paris Agreement to understand and estimate the potential of the land use sector and agriculture for mitigation, okay? So first finding, considering just historical emissions from deforestation of the Atlantic forest. Well, we lost 115 million hectares of forest since the arrival of Europeans in the 16th century, which were responsible for the emissions of 55 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. For the Amazon, to have a comparison, we have lost already 73 million hectares of forest, following the data from INPE and PRODIS, mostly in the last decades, and it resulted in the emissions of 46 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. You can see on the left side the original forest cover of the Amazon and the Atlantic forest. And on the right side, you see the current situation where almost all the Atlantic forest was lost. A lot of the Amazon was lost, but we still need to keep at least 80% of the Amazon left. So this is why this is the Atlantic forest is the biome of restoration. So now looking at SEG, and if we look at the whole series from 2000 to 2018, but using the last year of the series, that is representative of this period, and we check the emissions of all sectors, we find that the Atlantic forest is the second biome in Brazil responsible for emissions, being responsible for 454 megatons of CO2 equivalent. What places the Atlantic forest in second place in Brazil as the emitter. The Amazon is the first one with 39%. And if the Atlantic forest were a country, we would be the 18th largest emitter in the world, getting just in front of the UK that currently in 2018 was the 18th and would become the 19th because the Atlantic forest would be a bit over. So it's a new finding taking this approach of biome. A very important message. Tasso showed the profile of emissions from Brazil, from states, municipalities, and then with zoom at the Atlantic forest and compare to overall data of Brazil and the Amazon as a biome, we have a different profile of emissions for Atlantic forest, what means we need different strategies to get towards a net zero biome. First thing, energy is the leading sector individually, what's very different from Brazil and the Amazon, with 37% of total emissions. Agriculture is the second, and land use or deforestation is only the third, with 17% of the emissions, while for Brazil, just to say the colors, blue is Atlantic forest, red is Brazil, and green is the Amazon. So you can see the difference in these bars. But what Tasso said, if we put together the agriculture sector, agriculture per land use, it maintains as the main emission sector of the Atlantic forest with 50% of the emissions of the biome, a lower proportion than Brazil and the Amazon, but 50%. What's very important to keep this in mind, that besides tackling energy, we need to look towards agriculture. Okay, now this is the past. Looking to the future, our projections. First, we need to understand the land use pools that Marina and Tasso saved at the last time reviewing this report about that. And the message here, we have land pools of the Atlantic forest from 2005 until 2050. And the message here is that we have land, first, in the last line, to restore 15 million hectares of forest. That is one goal for the biome. We have room to expand to increase the area of agriculture of crops from 17 to 25 million hectares until 2050 and deliver all the projections of food production expected from the biome. And we will decrease the area of pastures and will recover and will reach 21 million hectares of recovered pastures in 2050 that can increase the herd and cattle production with just a moderate intensification. So the message here is that to reach that, we need to zero deforestation totally in 2030. So zeroing deforestation, we have room to increase agricultural production and restore forests. This is our model. Our simulations are based in these land use pools. And the main findings are now the mitigation potential. Only the restoration of 15 million hectares in 2025, 30, and 50. Let's look at just at the green bar. That is our deadline for the Paris Agreement. Restoration is the main sector responsible for mitigation potential with more than 2 gigatons of CO2 equivalent of mitigation potential. Second, reduction of deforestation. Creation of protected areas has a very minor contribution. Recovery of pastures until 2050 can contribute to mitigate 1 gigatons of CO2 equivalent emissions. And then integrated pastures, crops, and forest systems, and also no-till. So all this together ends up that we have the potential to mitigate in 2050 6.28 gigatons. This is the accumulated value, not 1 year, okay? From 2005 until 2050 to mitigate 6.28 gigatons, what equals the emissions of the USA and UK in 2008. It's actually a bit more. And it would be also similar or equivalent to 1/3 of the 2018 emissions of France for 45 years if we go from 25 to 2050, just to give a size of what we are talking about. And finally, the main synthesis of this, on the upper left side, we have the emissions, land use change. So in blue is emissions and red is removals. We zero deforestation in 2030 and we don't have no more emissions. And we keep removing with forest restoration and creation of protected areas. And there is a huge negative balance. Agriculture, we have increase in emissions because we have a big herd inside and a lot of removals, but the sector, food production, is positive. But when we put together agriculture and land use change as overall land use, the sector becomes neutral in 2042 without major technological changes. It's just by zeroing deforestation, restoring forests, and adopting low-carbon agriculture that we already have all the technology, policies in place. We don't need any magic to achieve that and be neutral from 2042 and be negative from that. So the message here is that we have potential for the sector that is responsible for 50% of the emissions of the Atlantic forest to be neutral, increasing food productivity, generating new jobs, more income, restoring with zero deforestation. And it's fundamental to put together agriculture and forests together because agriculture doesn't get negative alone. But if we put food production together with restoration and zeroing deforestation, food production becomes neutral in Brazil. So this is, we hope this is considered by our government and our leaders, not only federal government, state governments, companies, to go towards this challenge, and we can be even more ambitious. Thank you very much, Marina.
Thank you, Luis. It was great. Yeah, it's interesting to see how many opportunities Brazil have to decrease emissions and increase carbon sequestration. And then I will bring Izabella to the floor. Izabella, how low Brazil can go and how far we can go with our ambitions to decrease emissions. And it's possible to become net positive, not only net zero in the next future. So you have 20 minutes and the floor is yours.
10 minutes?
20.
20? Oh, great. So additional carbon budget. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me to join you today. I will speak using my hat of Concertação for Amazon, not for UN, again, and also as a former minister for the environment. And I was really listening to my friends, and I have to be back to the past to understand better why we are here in this moment in Brazil. Okay, and what you can see that not only forests are very important for our, as an asset, considered climate agenda, but also as part of our strategy for development. Can you hear me now? Oh, I'm sorry, because this is my new expression with masks. No. Okay. Okay, I'll be back to the past. Casagrande, the governor is here. Okay, sorry. I'm not usual for me today, but let's go. So what's very important here is to understand how we can use this experience and these projects, also how civil society is playing in Brazil in the innovative political role, not only to go against, but to propose based on our realities, and not only environmental reality, but social and economic ones. This means that we should address climate change, consider development agenda. And this is very important. That's why NDC is a key tool to address not only how step by step you can raise our ambition, but indeed how we understand as an emerging economy, a developing economy, how we can use climate agenda to have a positive development based on nature and also based on social assets. This is very important to observe because the challenges when it comes to developing economies, it's different when you have developed economies. And that's why I'm here to show or to share with my friends, with you, a new initiative that brings these guys together and other ones, okay? And we have a proposal, a new study showing how you can propose our new NDCs in Brazil based on scenarios using the same methodology that we adopted in 2015 when Brazil presented the most ambitious NDCs in the world. And based on considering the assets for civil society, subnational players, private sector, financial sectors, everyone's. We have here the governor of state of Espírito Santo, the head of the consortium of the climate governors in Brazil, and how we have the engagement from subnational players together with the different sectors of Brazilian society to propose this. It's more than 400 people, society, institutions that were engaged, to bring a new vision and perspective for Brazil. And this is very interesting because we adopt the same methodology, the same inspiration that we had in 2015. What is very important to observe here when we have Tasso, Azevedo mention the process and all the numbers, we work together. I'm very honored that I work with Tasso. That in 2010, as he mentioned, when he was back from Copenhagen, Brazil adopted a national policy on climate change. And we established targets. And do you remember that before Paris, emerging economies don't have the obligation to have targets. And we assume voluntary targets internationally, but in Brazil, legal ones, to address concrete public policies, not only to tackle deforestation, but to prepare Brazil to come into this new low-carbon economy world. And it was a very important experience because, of course, we have the driver of deforestation to tackle deforestation, but also we need to bring these issues, consider the energy transition, also waste solutions for Brazil, and also how we can bring agriculture and forestry together into the new perspectives. And this is very important because this is reflected here. Okay, later you have in English. You can go to the Brazilian hub, like the climate hub, you can access this in English. But what I'm saying here, it is very important to observe. We were able to develop scenarios using this knowledge, using this experience from Copenhagen until Paris. and showing that Brazil has more than alternatives. We have the moral obligation and economic obligation to address climate change because this is good for Brazil development. We don't have to solve the problems based as developing economies have to replace things. We have alternatives. All the innovations, all the technologies, they are in our bookshelves. We don't need international cooperation to solve our problems. We need to promote this to share with other countries that we can share solutions, not problems. And this is a political asset for a country that has the solutions and today, unfortunately, insists to add new problems for the world. And this is very, very interesting because when you go into these different scenarios, you propose different scenarios now. It's fascinating because when we adopt our NDC in Paris, Brazil was the first developing countries or emerging economies that proposed an economy-wide NDCs. And this is very important because you're not going to business as usual, cut emissions. We're going to cut emissions based on economic perspectives. And this is what it is an asset because we are looking for to use climate change, not only to bring adaptation and resilience, but as a new inspiration, if I can use the expression, to address development in our country. And this is very important because we are a huge country. You have Amazon region, Atlantic forest, you have other biomes, but we are really a huge country with inequalities. We're not homogeneous ones. You need to understand how Brazil go deep into this agenda, and that's why the subnational players are absolutely important. Without the governors and the mayors, and without the civil society and the local needs, consider the local needs, it's impossible to have shortcuts and as you can have to address concrete solutions and to have really climate change, to tackle climate change, low carbon economy as an ally for Brazil development. And this is very, very interesting because when you develop these scenarios, it's fascinating how we can understand in 3 different scenarios how the importance of the new economic model for Brazilian development. The first one, only to simplify here because I don't have much time to explore this, but the first one is, you named this as a economic recovery, considering pandemic crisis, and adopting the conservative approach. Okay, we are not able to end deforestation, for example. We don't, in this scenario, we don't adopt carbon pricing, for example, and also have the focus on land use and deforestation because as was exposed here, it's key for Brazil to have the solution on this. And we can achieve, unfortunately, with this scenario, we cannot achieve the target that we established in Paris Agreement, okay? It's around 41% of the reduction of emissions. This is not enough, okay? But it's a clear example using economic recovery, okay? How you can manage this agenda and be efficient, but not a good player, okay? It's a scenario that showed to us that Brazil will stay in the past. But we'll go into the new 2 scenarios. This is fascinating how you can use this tool to make clear that we can go into this scenario and show you what. We have the second scenario that we name Recovery with Fair Transition. And we are able to cut 6% of our emissions, okay? Consider the reference year, the base year 2005. And this is very, very important to understand based on the 3rd inventory. And you go into the 4th inventory that Brazil government present this week, you're able to have the reduction around 6% of our emissions. And how you do this? Land use, tackle deforestation, and carbon price. 1/3 of this contribution comes from the carbon price and the arrangements, the progressive, step by step, and the progressive strategy that at the end of the process, 2030, the ton, it's around $19, $20 the ton of CO2 in Brazil. So you have the economic scenarios, you have the income growth, you have the job generation growth, you have the social inequality solutions. You design use all the political arguments that the government used to adopt to take decisions considering how we will promote development in Brazil. And the 3rd scenario that is fascinating because we bring everything, 0 deforestation, okay? You will align with net zero by 2050. The 2nd scenario also. You are able to achieve a reduction around 82% of the emissions in Brazil, as Tasso presented to us, okay? So what it is, what it means, that Brazil has all the tools, all the alternatives, all the chances, and also all the perspectives to take the right decision, the decision in the right directions. What you have today in Brazil is the setbacks. When you compare to 2010, you have an asset. 2015, Brazil was the key player in developing economies to manage Paris Agreement and also to manage differentiation group. 2020, Brazil consolidated the setbacks. And 2025, nobody knows because the government didn't present here in this Black Friday and this year, as I used to say this, because we raised the numbers, so you imagine we can cut because something that is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And you don't have a target for 2005 now. Okay, so you can think, so Brazil take a decision that you can promote deforestation until 2025, and after this, we'll deal with this, consider 2030. And 2030 is the same target that you adopted in 2015. So there is no ambition in Brazil today, okay? The guys are looking for to address how we can manage better to stay in the same position, to avoid the setbacks that was established in 2020. But indeed, Brazil is, again, not a key player that can bring climate change, tackle climate change, not only consider the solidarity around at the global level, but bring for us, consider an asset for our development. So the three scenarios shows to us how we can use the different dynamics, political, economic, and social dynamics in a huge country, consider Amazon protection, considering restoration, native space solution, consider Atlantic forest as a really, really important asset for us because 80% of the Brazilian population lives in Amazon region, in forest regions, and also bring all the gaps of infrastructure, transport, not only agriculture, but also energy, the energy fixing, the biofuels, all the alternatives that you can use, and also a low carbon economy, low carbon agriculture, sorry. So this is very important to be observed. Why? Because you need to go against deforestation. This is a moral imperative and a legal imperative in our society. We need to understand how climate governance will improve our performance in development. So the subnational player should come with a relevant role. It's not the federal government alone. It's not the president that took the decision to go against this and destroy everything. So the subnational players must come in a new climate, innovative climate governance arrangements in Brazil. Also, carbon price, markets will come, but not only to pay. We need to understand that today we have shared responsibilities, and it means that there are players. Co-responsibilities means that you should play together. So how you combine private sector with public sector, for example, with regulatory arrangements that Brazil needs. And this study shows different alternatives to manage this. And finally, we need to understand our perspectives to address social inequalities in these countries. Consider the growth of income, job generation, but also be prepared to understand the regional inequalities, how we can manage this, consider adaptation and resilience in our country. So this is fascinating. And now my last comment, my personal comment. As a former minister, I understand that this is an important momentum for Brazilian society, because this means that we are able, as society, to come together with the ambition not only to tackle climate change, but to be contemporary and also planetary. This is very, very important because we have assets, we have solutions, we have a society that believes in climate change, that you need to tackle climate change, you need to be better than we are today. You have social inequalities, and you have a robust science that comes together with us to make sure that we can take the right directions and the right decisions. So this is an excellent example, okay? If I have to be minister today, it was very difficult for me to go against the society with this proposal, okay? Because really a robust one, and we have, because really, this is very, very important, the first exercise. I'm very proud that I could join this initiative. It's yes, of course, and everyone's together. Do you remember that I'm the first one at 24? Don't forget it. But I'm too old, but not too old, okay? But one thing is that Brazil must be back. Okay, and Brazil must be back not only for Brazilians. Brazil must be back because of the world. okay? The world needs Brazil, and Brazil needs the world. And my feeling is that today, what you can believe, what you can really believe, and bring all the coins into this practice, believe in our society. We are able to make the difference, and we will make the difference in the better way. So this, later we have this in English. I'm sorry, because we have problems here. But be sure, when you come have this civil society with the diversity of opinions and also the diversity of assets, political and economic assets, to bring society together and to face our social inequalities, I'm convinced that the next 20 years or the next 10 years, that critical, Brazil must be back, and Brazil should forget these numbers that Tasso and the Atlântica showed to us, and more than this, I hope that in the future, these guys come here and say, we cut emissions and we have the raised new numbers based on low carbon economy. And you can do this, you must do this, we need to do this, more than this, in my opinion, really. If you want to do this, the Brazilian people will come to the world with a new perspective, to be sure. Again, we'll be back to the countries that want solutions, not problems. Forget the climate populism that we have today in Brazil. This is a climate populism. This is not climate policies, okay? And be sure that without democracy, it's impossible to have this inclusiveness that we need in climate change. So this is the challenge that we have today, and I hope that next year you can have the right direction again, be back, and with these guys and the other guys and this lady, this girl, is too young, okay? You can show the world that we are here to the new relationship between development, humanity and nature, and more than this, make the difference in a positive way. So this is, for me, summarize everything here, the efforts of the last 15 years, I think so, okay? And shows that the Brazilian society has perspectives for the next 15 years. So let's do this together. Come to Brazil, be sure that we'll do this in a better way. You have all the conditions and to avoid the climate fake news. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot. Thank you, Izabella. It's interesting also to see that all studies shows that it's possible to achieve 80% of ambitions until in our emissions decrease until 2030. So it's a lot, 80%. All studies can show this alignment. Yes, now I want to move to the Q&A time, but first I would like to give a space for the Governor Renato Casagrande from Espírito Santo State, and the leader of Climate Governors of Alliance, the Alliance of Climate Governors in English. And if you want to have the floor, would be great too. Please, there is a microphone there. And se o senhor quiser se posicionar no microfone e falar algumas palavras, seria muito rica a sua contribuição. Pode falar aí. Pode, não tem problema nenhum. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. I don't speak English. Você vai me ajudar.
Ok.
Para quem não fala português aqui, neste momento. Eu quero, primeiro, parabenizar a apresentação dos trabalhos e as 3 apresentações que eu vi. Do Tasso eu vi uma parte dela, mas vi as outras. Momento importante, estou acompanhando aqui como governador, mas estou acompanhando também como presidente do Consórcio Brasil Verde, que é a coalizão dos governadores pelo clima. E organizamos essa coalizão pela importância que o tema tem, mas também pelo afastamento do governo federal de um tema tão importante como este. Os governadores, nós achamos importante a gente avançar um pouco mais, até por responsabilidade, porque também não podemos só ficar cobrando do governo federal posições, nós temos responsabilidades também em todas essas áreas apresentadas. O momento é um momento importante porque o desafio que o planeta tem é um desafio muito grande e é um desafio que não tem facilidade de ser alcançado. Nós, no Brasil, temos mais facilidades. Se a gente conseguir, como foi apresentado aí, zerar o desmatamento, nós já alcançamos um percentual de redução altíssimo e podemos até passar bem da meta que foi estabelecida pelo governo brasileiro agora nesta conferência, que também considero, e falei isso para o nosso negociador, hoje considero que nós podíamos ter avançado mais com relação a esse meio do caminho, pela possibilidade que a gente tem de estabelecer políticas fortes com relação à redução e zerarmos o desmatamento até final desta década. Também considero, como a Izabella disse, a ex-ministra disse, que nós temos uma oportunidade. Sim, o que era um empecilho, hoje é uma oportunidade. Então, nós estamos na coalizão, no consórcio, trabalhando com... o primeiro objetivo nosso é fazer com que cada governante, cada estado tenha seu plano de neutralidade das emissões. Isso para nós é importante, porque coloca efetivamente os estados para terem políticas de redução das emissões e programas de mudanças climáticas. Acho que essa é a primeira tarefa que nós temos neste momento. Segundo, nós temos também no consórcio a possibilidade de debatermos nacionalmente, dentro do Brasil, e participarmos dos fóruns internacionais com uma posição que ajude o Brasil a alcançar suas metas, que contrapõe o Brasil quando ele não tem uma posição de vanguarda e que ajude o Brasil na hora que ele tem uma posição de vanguarda. Então, é mais uma força de articulação política. E esta conferência foi uma demonstração clara da força das entidades do Brasil. A presença das entidades do Brasil aqui é uma presença praticamente recorde, e a presença dos governadores aqui é uma presença recorde. Então, assim, isso não tem nenhuma dúvida que também fez com que o governo brasileiro pudesse assumir compromissos. É lógico que o governo brasileiro depende e carece de confiança, porque foram 3 anos de muita negação ao tema, mas o ambiente político nacional e o ambiente político internacional fez com que os nossos negociadores pudessem assumir compromissos mais efetivos. O que nos interessa agora é saber como o caminho vai ser percorrido para que isso se transforme numa realidade. Então, cabe a nós, governantes, e cabe a nós, sociedade, acompanharmos de perto, e cabe a nós, governos estaduais, de praticarmos efetivamente as nossas ações no combate ao desmatamento, nos nossos programas de reflorestamento. O Espírito Santo tem o programa Reflorestar, que é um programa que efetivamente faz um acompanhamento de 7% da cobertura florestal do nosso estado, com pagamento de serviços ambientais, com uso de royalties de petróleo para isso. Então, alguns estados já têm iniciativas importantes que precisam ser destacadas e multiplicadas. Por isso, a nossa presença aqui hoje vai poder legitimar o trabalho que vocês, como sociedade, têm feito e que nós, no governo, temos que praticá-las. Obrigado a todos vocês.
I will summarize Renato's talk. Muito obrigado, governador.
Obrigada.
So, in very few words, Renato, the governor, mentioned this initiative of the coalition of the governors for the alliance. There is a need, since the federal government is some way far away from the needs and the urgency, the governments consider it important to get together, to push towards a more positive agenda. Then, second, he mentioned that they see this as an opportunity, as this group of governors, all the climate change challenge ahead of us, it's an opportunity for us, for the country, for Brazil. And then that they organize themselves in this coalition to push the dialogue inside Brazil, but also in international forums. So they are pushing the agenda as a group collectively, and not only inside the Brazilian society, but going outside, overseas, in the international forums to bring the possibilities of Brazil as a country. He also emphasized the power and the presence of the Brazilian leadership in this conference here, not only the federal government, but they have 13 governors coming to the COP here, to Glasgow. We have 27 states in Brazil, 13, I guess, 25 governadores assinaram
Yes.
25. From the 27 states, 25 governors signed it and are part of this coalition, and 13 are coming to Glasgow to show this presence, so emphasize this leadership of Brazilian leaders here, not only of the federal government. And then finally, he's saying that they want to build a path towards reality about that. And he also mentioned from his state, Espírito Santo, Programa Reflorestar. It's a program that takes care of forests in Espírito Santo that has also payment for environmental services activities. It's based in royalties of oil, and it's an example of a successful project for conservation and restoration. And the Espírito Santo is a state 100% Atlantic forest. So I'm very proud of this initiative. We support a lot. Casa Grande, thank you very much. Marina,
Thank you so much for this spontaneous translation, and thank you also, Renato, for your words. I would like to give the floor to Eduardo Trani. He's the Environmental Secretariat of São Paulo State, and I'll give the opportunity of 2 minutes for him, and then we open the floor for questions and so on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Eu vou pegar a mesma linha do Casagrande. May I talk in Portuguese? And then Paquito, you do the translation, so I go faster, 2 minutes.
fala devagar que eu
No, I
pego.
could say in English, but okay, I read in Portuguese. I made in English, I think, Izabella.
I think that's better if you can
Okay,
speak in
okay,
English.
okay. I'll
And
do it in
understand
English, and you
your
apologize for
your
my
English is better
awkward
than mine.
vote. Okay, thank you.
I speak Brazilian English. You
Oh, me
speak
too,
better
me too,
than
me
I.
too.
So
We both,
relax and
we
enjoy.
both. Okay, so Izabella, nice to see you, and I'd like to host everybody. I'm here in name of the governor of São Paulo that had to leave yesterday, João Dória, that stayed with Casagrande. Casagrande, it's a great pleasure to be with you. The 2 states that come first, São Paulo and Espírito Santo, we are here. Very fast, I think it is very strong, the movement in São Paulo for the 7 national governments. It started with the ABEMA. ABEMA is the organization of the 27 states, leadered in the climate group. I'm here with Jussara, Lucon, and all our friends that had a big work during the last year for to make a proposal, and we are very happy that all these states have studied the same thing, and we have a very important report that will be made by ABEMA afterwards. But now, just for saying for São Paulo experience, I'd like to say I'm very happy to be with Tasso with us. São Paulo and the Laboratório do Clima made an agreement 4 months ago because we will use exactly the same numbers from the inventory. That's very, very important that São Paulo admitted that, and we work together in the state level, in regional level, and in the local government levels. That's very, very, very important. And what we bring into the COP, I'm showing you, I'm just this only report, but it's already in. We are bringing a work we did in the last 4 months. That are the guidelines for the Climate Action Plan 250, net zero for São Paulo. It was discussed, Izabella, with 200 different associations in 2 months, and we have the guidelines in it. The governor made a decree obligating that we bring for the Society of São Paulo a plan with all the targets for 2020, 30, 40, and 50, discussed with everybody in July next year, but we have already the guidelines that are made, and we have in Portuguese and in English. It's a very, very interesting, and I call you all to read this book, and we can give the direction. So it's just to say that we are all together working in the same direction. As the Reflorestar in Espírito Santo, São Paulo, we did the Refloresta without the R. That's another very strong program with ambitions of 1.5 million hectares till 2020. Half of it is the Código Florestal enforcement, and the other one is the incentive. And we're putting money directly for payments for ecological systems. And in this week, will be all the regulatory marks ready for procurement, for Refloresta, for the payment. In São Paulo, you have our law next week for the social payments. So we have all the instruments to really go towards our goal of this important That's it, very fast. Thank you very much. So I let you not to translate my awful English. Sorry for my mistakes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Eduardo. Yes, it's in the absence of federal government efforts, it's important to see the strong civil society work in Brazil and also the subnational government's initiative. So I will open the floor for questions, comments. Please, the microphone, there is one microphone there, another there, and feel free. Yeah. Please introduce yourself, where you come from. And,
Hello, you hear me well? Okay. Hello, I am Pauline Dennis. I am representing the University of Leuven from Belgium. First of all, thank you so much for the passionate talk that you gave. It was very refreshing to hear you all speak about the NDC, the vision for NDCs in Brazil. So you talked a lot about mitigation, and that makes sense since we're in an international context and there's a need for international collaboration because it's an international benefit. Now I am from Belgium, but I am living and working in Brazil. And in Belgium, we talk a lot about adaptation as well, which is also part of the NDC. And actually working in Brazil, I see that it's not that much part of the conversation yet, since there's a lot of focus also on mitigation. My question now is, how are you or could you use the climate adaptation discourse to promote reforestation and sustainable land use in Brazil? Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
No, maybe one quick comment on this. I think, yeah, in less effort, there is a platform now called Adapta Brazil, which involves efforts from different areas. It starts in the, actually it's interesting that if there is one program that haven't changed the course,
yes,
passed through, below the radar, so it's not like nobody's touching this to do to screw up, is Adapta Brazil. It's just moving, and the program is developing. Actually, recently we have the launch of the new website with the new tools, scenarios. So I would say there is an effort going on. It's not as strong as maybe it could be, but I think there is a route there happening. And probably the reason why we don't talk too much about that is because actually it's moving without too much bumpy at this moment. But thinking about like the land use, the thing in Brazil is that most of the actions you do in terms of mitigating emissions on the land use sector, it's actually at the same time a measure of adaptation. So yeah, so maybe we should emphasize more that, but I think that all the efforts we have to do actually link it to the land use will end up have consequences on the adaptation. Just to give one obvious link is the whole thing about water.
Yes.
Like because the drought that we are having is linked too much about this, what's going on in the deforestation and restoration of strategic areas and so on. And this has consequences. If we find ways in which stop this degradation and deforestation and increase the regeneration, etc., then we will have a good consequence in terms of adaptation for us.
Yes, only to add a comment, when we present our NDC in 2015, we present a national plan of adaptation. And today, I fully agree with Tasso. I think that for emerging economy, developing economies, we need to bring things together and to design also resilience. Our solutions must, to mitigate and also to promote development, as I highlighted, we need to bring adaptation and resilience as a really, really strategic approach, because we need robust solutions. It's not something that we can use only for the next 10 years. Okay, we need to understand how we build really robust strategies bring adaptation and resilience together with mitigation. And I think that this is something that probably consider Adapta Brazil and other social agenda that is coming now, considering inequalities after pandemic crisis. Consider what's happening in Brazil with pandemic crisis. It is impressive how Indeed, I think that these issues will come with powerful political perspectives. So it's more than a trend, okay? In my opinion, this is impossible to think about public policy in a country like Brazil without to bring adaptation and mitigation together. But, okay? Is that okay for you? Are you comfortable?
Yes, I just forgot to mention that I talked about mitigation on the one side, which is an international benefit, and then adaptation on the other hand, which is more about water security and more about extreme weather events and how this is directly impacting on the Brazilian population and how using adaptation more in this course could incentivize Brazilians more to think positive thoughts.
You're absolutely right. We need to, but we cannot forget that in the past, consider the climate constituency, when you have the debate, mitigation is an issue that brings everyone on board because affect all the countries. When you go to adaptation used to be at the national levels. It was a huge dispute in the past, considering developing economies. Today, it's coming in different perspectives. But I fully agree with you that it's impossible for us, for example, to think about house gapping in Brazil, okay, considering social inequality in the cities, and we address solutions based on places and based on an approach that considers climate vulnerability and resilience. And this means that we need to address new materials, new ways to have housing, and mitigation is part of this equation. So what is, in my opinion, critical here is you need a new mindset, innovative political and economic mindset to put in practice action. To put Paris Agreement in action means that you need to understand local needs and global co-benefits. And this means that you need to have a win-win strategies to show that we can manage the inequalities of the past, for example, okay, in a society like Brazil, and make clear what needs to stay behind or stay in the past, and also consider how you manage this passive as an asset in the future. So my feeling is that to be surprised in the next 5 years, probably when you go with the first cycle of Paris Agreement implementation, to understand better the dimension of the challenge that you have when you're looking for to bring countries like Brazil. And land use agenda is absolutely important for this because you go into agribusiness, for example, you need to understand the social inequality in land use. And it's really, really a huge problem in Brazil. Okay, we don't have a middle class, a rural middle class in Brazil. So you need to understand better how you manage this and social inequality to come. This and adaptation is, in my opinion, the password to open this new, not Pandora box, but this opportunity, new perspective in a country like Brazil. But you are right. Come to Brazil and enjoy. I invite you. It's very nice. Really.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, please. Yes, please.
My name is Christer Soderberg. I'm from Circle Carbon, a company in Spain, mas morei muitos anos no Brasil, com muito prazer, tenho filha que mora lá também. A minha pergunta, oh, sorry, I fell into it. My question is, besides this very interesting and inspiring presentation, which I really appreciate because it's very inspiring. We need inspiring information. But my question regards negative emissions technologies. We know that even with the best emissions reductions, adaptations, we will still need to reduce, and we will need to find ways of putting carbon back into the soil. I have worked for the past 10 years with biochar. I was inspired about biochar when I planted trees in Brazil 12 years ago, because biochar comes from terra preta. And my question is if there are any negative emissions technologies looking at the application of biochar, of terra preta, to reduce emissions, regenerate soils, reduce use of water, and increase food security. Thank you.
Please.
Maybe
I think that Tasso can comment this, no?
Yes.
so we do have in I didn't talk about that. Actually, I even jumped the point that talks about this. But when we do the estimation of greenhouse gas emissions, both the estimation of emissions and removals, we have something that we call in our system emissions don't count in the national inventory. So there are some things that we think should be on the inventory, both counting for the, for the emissions and for the removals. Two of them, they're very important. One is fire. There's this whole debate of fire. Ernie, which is sitting there, now I see you. Ernie is like our specialist on this, and we're doing a lot of work on trying to think how to incorporate the data of fire on the inventories. And the other one is the variations of carbon and soil. And the reason for that is that if you take the IPCC guidelines and the way it's implemented in most of the countries, including Brazil, is that if you have a land use, a set land use, let's say it's pasture in 1 year, and then you come back, it's still pasture there, you consider that the balance is 0 by default. And that's done for everything. So you say forest stays forest, balance 0. It's agriculture, balance 0. Now, we know that if you do the right practices, you can increase the carbon in soil. And actually, if you do the bad practices, you can lose carbon in soil, right? So we try to unveil this by doing this analysis on time frame. We are now on I think it's the 4th year that we are doing these calculations for soil. And we're focusing on this first period. And the data is available on the website as emissions NCI, which means non considering the inventory. And it's interesting. If we take, we are taking the carbon variations in soil for forest plantations, also carbon variation in soils by different practices on pasture land. And there are some other minor ones, but the main one is the one from pasture. So basically, if you have like an average degraded pasture in Brazil, it's actually emitting carbon. And if you have a pasture that is well managed, as we say, with no signs of degradation, it's actually capturing carbon. And when you sum up the whole thing, 20 years ago, it would, or if you go in the beginning of in 1990, for the first data that we have, if you take the emissions from the areas that are in degradation and the removals from the areas that are in, well managed, then you will have another emissions to add in our inventory of about 100 million tons, right? So our emissions will be higher than what we actually are reporting. Now, if you go, 30 years later, and then you go to 2020, it's different. Like, because a lot of pasture that was degraded, it passed to well-managed pasture. Now the situation is, if we actually count the carbon in soil, these variations, and the emissions and removals, we will have a net removal of 150 million tons to include in our inventory. So it's really impressive what can happen if you count. And it's the most important on this debate is that if you look at all the commitments and actions that we have on, for example, in our plan for low carbon agriculture in Brazil, most of the results are in the soil. But we don't count the emissions and removals from soil, so we will not see the results, right? So it's extremely important that we include the dynamics of soil, so we can capture this exactly what the point that you mentioned. The soils are extremely important to capture carbon. Just by managing them, not like fancy technology of storage, and it's just simply manage the soil well.
And I was speaking to agronomists in Holanda.
São Paulo.
I said, well, do you practice no-till agriculture? Because that's a big debate in Europe. How do we introduce no-till to increase soil organic carbon? And the agronomist, biologist, he said, in Brazil for the past 30 years, you've been practicing no-till on 80% of your agriculture, which is very impressive. And that is an example that I think Brazil could tell the world.
I agree.
Because there you've been adding soil organic carbon for those 30 years.
Just to complement the new ABC plan, low carbon agriculture plan, it includes these bioproducts that improve carbon sequestration. There is a new activity inside the plan. Yes, we are out of the time. I would like to thank you everyone in the name of Imaflora and Climate Observatory. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you have, if you'd like to have this in Portuguese, okay, but later you have in English. And it's very nice because you have the University of Rio de Janeiro and the Climate